in each one of us. She made afghans with yarn and love, often far ahead of time. Grandma had a blanket ready for Steffi's little Pierce long before she even knew that he was coming. And to her last days, there was a basket next to her chair that you could not take. It contained the beginnings of an afghan that she was crocheting for Daniel's first child. Grandma followed our travels around the world at a time when geography changed so much that the family had to buy her a new world atlas. She remembered all of our birthdays. Those who lived further away cherished the cards that she sent, full of news of farm, the weather, the crops, and the family. Janet remembers packages from Grandma with pretty new clothes she'd sewn, or a coffee can full of cookie crumbs. She also remembers being woken up in the middle of the night because Grandpa and Grandma had called and weren't thinking of the time difference. Calls weren't very frequent, so the whole family got up and talked with them anyway. One of the best things about Grandma's house on the farm and in Ocheyedan was the cookie jar. Joy remembers getting to help bake some of those cookies. Another thing that many of us remember are the meals around their big dining room table with lots of food. And I don't remember having anything besides beef at their house. It was usually roast with potatoes and carrots and homemade bread or rolls. Devotions and prayer before and after each meal is Denise's strongest memory. She didn't appreciate it as a kid, but now she thinks that it's really the very best thing that they could pass on to all of us. Julie remembers staying with Grandma for a week while she was recovering from a stay in the hospital. And despite her own needs, Grandma took the time to pray for the needs of others. Joy and Nate got to tag along to Sioux Falls as Grandpa and Grandma ministered at the state penitentiary. Grandpa would go in and share Christ with the inmates, and Grandma would stay with them out in the foyer area. And at the time, the upcoming trip to Bonanza was probably most exciting. However, looking back, they also learned a little more about God's forgiveness and compassion. All grandchildren consider some of the things their grandmas do to be a little strange. Heidi was amazed at Grandma's complicated undergarments with many contraptions, straps, and layers. This one will let you know that Beth is one of the younger grandchildren. She remembers that Grandma had a watch that she actually had to wind each morning. And Christopher remembers marveling at the old brushes and mirrors on Grandma's nightstand. He even remembers seeing Grandma with her hair down, brushing it very slowly. I think very few of us ever saw that. Grandma was always willing to help. She often told me of getting to help move the Bob Hibma family in 1968, and her car was full of odds and ends. And yet, at the age of 1, I was her most precious cargo. Christopher remembers standing in her kitchen in his pajamas early on the morning of July 13th, 1981, after the tornado ripped through their farm. She took care of Nate and Joy, sick with the chicken pox, when Marion was at the hospital having Julie. Grandma may very well have been the first green grandmother. Plastic bags were hung on the clothesline outside to dry. And anyone who visited her home in Ocheyedan in the summer needed to be prepared for a rather warm, or shall I say hot, house. Why use the air conditioning when the tree in the front yard keeps me cool? And Grandma was curious. She knew everything that happened within view of her house, even if she couldn't figure out why there were so many visitors across the street. They come from far away, but they never seem to stay very long. She was also curious when it came to anything having to do with her family. We still laugh about the time she spotted a beautiful blonde during the first hymn standing next to John on the other side of the church. She almost fell over into the pew in front of her trying to get a better look. There is much in Grandma that is worth emulating. She was warm and accepting and non-judgmental. In 1968, she met 3 young boys who, in Greg's words, had little self-control and even less discernment. And yet she welcomed them into her family and loved them like her own. Heidi came to visit Grandpa and Grandma when she was expecting Jasmine, and they were completely accepting, non-judgmental, and caring. I was going to say that Grandma welcomed her with open arms, but Grandma wasn't one to give hugs. But her welcome was evident in her warm smile and sparkling eyes as she patted your hand in greeting. The joke around our house was that if you wanted the Hibma clan to know some news, you told Grandma. Within a week, at least, or probably less, everyone was sure to know. But that only seemed to work for the good things. She wouldn't talk about the things that she perceived to be negative. For me, Grandma was a living example of Philippians 2:14. Do all things without grumbling or complaining. The closest I ever came to hearing Grandma complain was when she would tell me that it had been raining for a week and none of her boys had been to see her. I know they aren't busy in the field. We all know that Grandma loves the little ones. Grandma often mentioned to Janet that she hadn't heard about her birth until 3 weeks later by mail. Well, she wanted to make sure that Eric and Janet called right away when Emily was born. 2 memories for Andrea and Joy are recent visits to see Grandma with their little ones. Each time Andrea went to see Grandma over the course of a couple of days, Caitlin had a big smile for her great-grandma. And I'm sure Grandma's smile was just as big in return. Joy visited Grandma just a few weeks ago with Charlotte, and she was so excited to learn that Joy and Jeremy will be welcoming another little one into their family. And it seems that Grandma has been getting on Beth's case not so long ago because she didn't have any news for her. It did take Beth a while to figure out what Grandma was talking about. And maybe Adam should have been there to hear that conversation. The little ones among us, like Pierce and Charlotte and Addison and Margot and Helen, probably think of Grandma as someone who is ancient. After all, their grandparents are old in their eyes. And that reminds me of Jeremiah 6:16, where the Lord says, "Stand by the roads and look, and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it, and find rest for your souls." If I can borrow something from that Uncle Steve wrote a couple weeks ago. We are very blessed, and it's all grace. None of us chose to be in this family. But from the oldest to the youngest, to have a mom and a dad, grandpa and a grandma, a great-grandma and a great-grandpa, and even great-great-grandparents who leave us a strong heritage of faithfully following paths that are far more ancient than they are.